On storm-heavy nights, many parts of Europe once believed that the sky itself could fill with riders. Not birds, not clouds, but a thundering host of spirits and hounds sweeping over fields and forests, too fast and too high to be entirely real. This was the Wild Hunt, a roaming procession of the dead, the fae, or the gods, depending on who was telling the story, and it was almost never good news. The hunt is not one single tale, but a pattern that repeats from Scandinavia down through Germany and across into the Celtic lands. It comes under many names and with many leaders, but the image is recognizable every time. A storm of riders, ghostly horses, baying hounds, and shrieking spirits racing through the night sky or along unseen roads just above the ground. To see or hear it was to feel the world shiver, as if the boundaries between the living and the dead, the human and the otherworldly, had been peeled back for a moment. In some places, people said the Wild Hunt was a cavalcade of the restless dead, souls who could not find their way to proper rest. In others, it was a fae procession, an otherworld hunting party led by powerful fairy lords and ladies. In still others, it belonged to the gods, a storm host under the command of a figure like Odin or another great rider, scouring the land for souls, oaths, and prey. What the hunt pursued depends on the tradition. Sometimes it chases animals or game, flocks of spectral deer and boar that no ordinary arrow could ever touch. Sometimes it hunts human souls, the dying, the unbaptized, the oath-breaker, the traveller foolish enough to be out on a night when wiser folk have barred their doors. Certain signs were said to come first. Dogs might whine and hide before any human heard the riders. The wind could shift suddenly, carrying strange horn calls or the echo of hooves where no road lay. Lights flickered in the clouds like distant torches, and the air took on that tense, waiting feeling that arrives just before a storm breaks. Those who claimed to have glimpsed the hunt spoke of riders whose cloaks whipped and twisted even when the air on the ground was still. Horses with eyes like coals, froth spraying from their mouths as if they had been galloping for centuries. Around and between them, lean hounds ran in a tight pack, white in some Celtic lands, black or grey elsewhere, often with red ears or glowing eyes that marked them as no ordinary dogs. Above all, there was a leader. In Germanic and Norse versions, this was often Odin or Woden, one-eyed, cloaked, riding a many-legged horse, surrounded by warriors and spirits. Elsewhere, it might be a fallen nobleman, a legendary hunter cursed to ride forever, or a lord of the dead such as the Welsh Gwyn ap Nudd, said to keep the restless spirits of and in his train. The leader's nature coloured the hunt's meaning. If a guard of storms and battle rode at its head, the hunt could herald war, plague, or turbulent years ahead. If a fairy or underworld king led it, the emphasis might be on souls, the gathering of the dead, the escorting of the newly departed, or the punishment of those who had broken ancient taboos. People did not treat the Wild Hunt as a spectacle to admire. It was an omen, and often a threat. In many regions, to see the hunt with your own eyes meant sickness, misfortune, or death for you or someone close to you within the year. Even merely hearing it pass overhead could leave a person weak, shaken, or marked in some subtle way. So there were rules. If the wind rose and strange cries rode on it, you stayed indoors if you could, banking your fire and snuffing unnecessary lights. If you were caught outside, you lay flat and silent by the roadside or in a ditch, letting the riders pass above you like a storm cloud. You did not call out, did not whistle, did not answer if a voice from the dark called your name. The hunt was also tied to time, especially the times when the year itself seems to stand between one state and the next. Midwinter and the 12 nights, the dark weeks when the old year has not quite died and the new year has not quite risen, are classic seasons for the Wild Hunt's ride in the north. So too are autumn festivals like Samhain and similar liminal nights in Celtic tradition, when the dead and the living are said to mingle more freely. Over the centuries, Christian storytellers sometimes folded older hunts into tales of damned souls, demons, and wandering sinners, giving the old riders new names and moral lessons. Yet the older threads show through: the storm, the dogs, the leader who is part god, part psychopomp, part fairy king, racing across a sky that does not entirely belong to humans. Even now, travelers in remote places occasionally report sounds they cannot quite explain on winter nights. A rush of wind with rhythm to it, a thread of horns in the distance, a feeling of being watched from above by something moving too fast to see. Most shrug it off as weather, planes, or tricks of the ear. But in older times, people had a name ready. The wild hunt was abroad, and the wise thing to do was to get low, keep quiet, and let it pass. In the next part of this journey, the focus tightens on the northern stories. Odin's furious host, winter skies over dark forests, and the way a storm can start to sound, if you listen too closely, like hooves and hounds hunting something just out of sight. In the north, when winter deepened and the wind began to sound like something breathing, people said that Odin was riding, not alone, and not in calm, but at the head of a furious host of riders, hounds, and dead men whose hooves and howls were woven into the fabric of the storm itself. In the Germanic and Norse worlds, the wild hunt often had one clear name, Woden's Hunt or Odin's Hunt. This was no minor spirit procession, but the passing of a god whose domains included battle, death, madness, wisdom, and the roaring emptiness of the winter sky. Odin was the one-eyed All-Father, but he was also Jolner and Jolohera, master of Yule, titles that tie him directly to midwinter and the time when the hunt was most feared. The image repeated itself from tale to tale. A bearded figure in a cloak, sometimes hooded, sometimes crowned by a wide hat, riding the eight-legged horse Sleipnir across the sky. Around him thundered an army of the dead and the otherworldly, warriors in broken armor, valkyries with streaming hair, and spectral beasts, all swallowed and revealed again by shredded clouds. Sleipnir was not an ordinary mount. He had 8 legs and could cross not only land and sky, but the boundaries between worlds, carrying his rider along roads that led through the realms of gods, mortals, and the dead. When such a horse's hooves struck the unseen paths of the air, the echo in human ears was the battering of a winter gale against roof and tree. Odin's followers in the hunt were as varied as his roles. As god of the slain, he commanded the Einherjar, the chosen dead of Valhalla, warriors taken from battlefields by valkyries to feast and train until the final battle of Ragnarok. As lord of storms and ecstasy, he gathered wild spirits of the air, Draugr and uneasy dead, and perhaps land spirits driven from their homes by change or neglect. For people on the ground, the connection between Odin and the hunt made a kind of grim sense. Winter storms in northern Europe can be violent and disorienting. High winds, sudden squalls, the roar of unseen forces barreling over forests and fields. To explain that noise as the passing of a divine hunting party, led by the god of war, was to give shape to chaos, to turn random weather into a story with motives and patterns. Yule, the old midwinter festival, sat at the heart of this pattern. Scholars and later folklorists link Yule to the time when the hunt was most active, when the dead were closest and the veil between worlds thinnest. Odin's Yule names and his restless, questing nature fit easily into a picture of a god who used this liminal season to ride out, gather souls, enforce oaths, and stir the boundaries of life and death. The hunt under Odin's lead was not just random terror. It carried moral weight. Some accounts say that oath-breakers, cowards, or those who mocked the gods might be chased, trampled, or swept up into the host as punishment. Others suggest that lost or wandering souls could be taken up and carried toward whatever afterlife awaited them, the hunt acting as a dark psychopompic escort. Still, the omen was rarely welcomed. Seeing Odin's hunt might mean that war was coming, that plague would sweep the region, or that the year ahead would be marked by famine and unrest. Even if no great calamity followed, those who claimed to have witnessed the host often spoke of exhaustion, strange dreams, or a sense of having been noticed by something that did not quickly forget. Stories warned that even the landscape had to respect the paths of this divine cavalcade. In some traditions, houses or kills built across old roads risked disaster. If Odin's hunt still travelled those routes in the sky's reflection of the land, anything in its way might be burned or broken. The message was clear. human plans should yield to older, invisible tracks. Nor was Odin always the only name attached to the northern wild hunt. Regional tales sometimes gave the lead to other figures, goddesses like Holder or Perkta, stern women of winter and household order, or even more Christianized beings such as the devil or a corrupted saintly companion. Yet even when the name changed, the shape of the story remained Odin-colored: storm, fury, judgment, and the dangerous beauty of a sky burning with unseen riders. If you imagine it now, picture a long northern night with snow just beginning to fall. Somewhere above the clouds, a line of riders forms, a one-eyed guard on an eight-legged horse, Valkyries wheeling around him like streaks of pale fire, hounds howling in the hollow spaces between gusts of wind. For those below, the wise choice is the same it has always been: bank the fire, stay low, and hope that Jolna's wild company is hunting somewhere else. In the Celtic and British lands, the wild hunt rides with a different accent. Here, its hoofbeats echo through misty hills and deep green valleys, and its leader is as likely to be a fairy king or lord of the dead as a storm god. In Welsh tradition, one prominent figure at the head of such a hunt is Gwyn ap Neath. He is described as a king of the Tylwyth Teg, the Welsh fair folk, and ruler of Annwn, the otherworld that lies beneath or alongside the mortal land. Gwyn's role is liminal, a guardian of the dead, a fairy lord, and, in later Christianized texts, a keeper of devils and restless spirits. When Gwyn rides out, he does not ride alone. He is accompanied by the Cwn Annwn, the hounds of the otherworld, spectral dogs whose appearance is as beautiful as it is terrifying. In many accounts, they are white with red ears, colors that mark them as unmistakably otherworldly, since white bodies with red ears are a common sign of beings from the Celtic otherworld. These hounds are not simple hunting dogs. Their baying is widely regarded as a sign that a soul is being seized at the very moment of death, or that death is drawing near. To hear their cries in the night, especially over lonely hills like Cadair Idris, was to know that the boundary between worlds had thinned and that the hunt was abroad. Sometimes, the leader of the hunt in Welsh lore is given as Annwn, another lord of Annwn who appears in the Mabinogi as a king of the otherworld. Both Annwn and Gwyn are linked to the Cwn Annwn and to the work of guiding souls, which may explain why different regions and storytellers attach one or the other to the same spectral cavalcade. In either case, the shape of the story is similar: a ruler of the dead riding with their hounds, gathering or escorting souls in the dark half of the year. Irish and Scottish traditions add their own fierce shadows. There, the hunt often merges with tales of the Sluagh, the host or horde of the unforgiven dead, sometimes described as an evil fairy host. The Sluagh are said to be twisted spirits, once human or fey, who fly through the air in great flocks like dark birds, seeking the souls of the dying. Old lore warns that west-facing windows should be kept tightly closed, especially where someone is sick or awake is being held, so that the Sluagh cannot slip in to snatch a departing soul. Their passing is associated with strange winds, battles fought in the air, and the slaughter of animals and people through poisoned darts or invisible attacks. Whether they are framed as corrupted fae or damned spirits, they form a kind of Celtic wild hunt whose prey is almost always human life itself. All of this is tied closely to the turning of the seasons. In Ireland and Wales, festivals like Samhain and Calan mark the end of harvest and the start of the dark half of the year, when the veil between living and dead is thinnest. On Norse Calan or Halloween night, ghosts, fairy hosts, and terrifying figures like the tailless black sow were all said to roam freely, exactly the sort of night when a wild hunt would ride. Some Welsh lore even places Gwyn ap Neath's hunt specifically at these thresholds. He is said to ride with his hounds over places like Cadair Idris or Glastonbury Tor, collecting the souls of those who have died over the past year and leading them to their rightful place in Annwn. In this role, he resembles Odin not only as a hunter, but as a psychopomp, a guide for the dead on their journey beyond. At the same time, the Celtic wild hunts blur more easily into fairy processions than some of their northern counterparts. The same hounds and riders might be described, in gentler moods, as escorting the Tulwith Teg or the She through the night on fairy processions, with music and lights drifting over hills and lakes. The line between a deathly hunt and a fairy cavalcade can be thin. What looks like a wedding ride from one angle can be a funeral march from another. In Irish and Scottish stories of the Sluagh, the hunt leans hard into nightmare. The host may appear as a vast flock of black ravens twisted together with undulating shadows, their wing beats echoing as omens of bad times ahead. They are said to take no favorites. Wicked or saintly, kind or cruel, all are potential prey, though some tales claim they have a particular taste for those who have known deep love or despair. Like the Norse tales, these Celtic and fate-tinged hunts come with rules for survival. Stay indoors after dark on the great threshold nights. Keep holy places and west-facing windows well guarded. Resist the urge to call out if you hear hounds in the sky or your name in the wind. Iron and salt may help, as with many dealings with the fair folk, but the safest choice is often humility and stillness, letting the host pass by without acknowledging it. If Odin's hunt feels like a battle storm, the Celtic versions feel like mist and mourning. Imagine a Welsh hillside under a low, clouded moon, white hounds with blood-red ears racing over the ridgeline, their master a pale figure half lost in fog, horns sounding softly like distant thunder. Or a western Irish farmhouse with its shutters barred, as a dark flock of shadow-birds wheels silently above, searching for any crack where a soul might slip free. All are faces of the same idea, a hunt that does not chase deer or boar alone, but hunts at the edges of life itself, where fae, gods, and the dead all have some claim. On any night when the wild hunt might ride, the most fragile part of the story is always the same, the humans beneath it. Gods, fae, and the dead thunder overhead, but it is the people on the ground who must decide how to move, how to hide, and whether to answer when the sky suddenly seems full of hooves. Across Europe, the first rule was simple: do not be outside if you can help it. When the wind began to sound like riders and hounds, when dogs whimpered and stared at what no one could see, people banked their fires, barred their doors, and drew curtains tight, treating the night as if it belonged, for a few hours, to someone else. If you had to travel, you took the most direct route you could and watched the sky with a kind of careful dread. If the hunt caught you in the open, there were more specific customs. Some said the right act was to lie face down beside the road or in a ditch, covering your head and eyes, letting the riders pass above like storm clouds and trusting they had better things to chase than you. Others insisted you should stand respectfully to one side, hat off, eyes down, and neither speak nor run no matter what voices you heard in the wind. Calling out to the hunt was almost universally condemned. To hail the riders, jeer at them, or even shout in fear was to draw their attention, and their attention, once caught, rarely went well for mortals. At best, a fool who mocked them might wake with bruises, strange exhaustion, or no memory of how they reached home. At worst, they could be dragged along as unwilling part of the host. There are stories of travellers who made both choices. One tells of a man walking home on a winter road when the wind rose without warning, carrying with it the clear sound of horns and howling. Remembering old advice, he threw himself flat, face in the frozen mud, and lay so still that even his teeth seemed to stop chattering. Hooves thundered past him, closer than seemed possible, right over his back, he would later swear. Dogs barked in voices like iron being struck, and something huge snorted beside his ear, spattering him with icy breath. He did not move until silence crept cautiously back into the air. When he finally dared to look up, the road was empty. Only the marks of many hooves and paws scored the frozen ruts, fading already as the wind filled them with drifting snow. He reached home shaken, but alive, and from then on he said that there are nights when the difference between life and death is knowing when not to raise your head. Another tale, told more as a warning, begins with a different choice. A young man, drunk on his own courage and a skin of winter ale, heard the hunt before he saw it. Horns, dogs, the clatter of unseen riders. Instead of hiding, he climbed a small rise and shouted into the dark, boasting that he feared no ghost and no god. The storm seemed to hesitate. Then a wind like a solid thing struck him, knocking him off his feet. He felt hands, too many hands, grab him by hair, clothing, arms, and drag him along the sky as if he weighed nothing at all. By morning, they found him miles from the road, clothes in tatters, body bruised as if he had been beaten with branches. He had aged overnight, hair touched with grey, eyes hollow. He never again walked out after dark without first glancing up, and when people asked what he had seen, he only said, "It is one thing to shout at a storm. It is another to have it answer." In some regions, there were rare stories of bargains. If the hunt rode with a god like Odin at its head, a person might plead for mercy for a dying loved one, or ask that a wandering soul be taken up into the host instead of left to roam. But such requests were dangerous. Any favor granted by a deathly procession might carry a price paid years later, when another life or oath came due. Celtic-flavored hunts and hosts like the Sluagh added their own customs. Families kept west-facing windows shuttered where the dying lay, lit candles or kept holy images nearby, and forbade calling out to anything seen or heard outside during a wake. If strange knocking came at the door or a beloved voice begged to be let in from the dark, the rule was to ignore it completely, no matter how much the heart broke to stay still. All these rules, lie down, keep silent, do not open, do not answer, share a single idea. When the wild hunt rides, humans are safest as observers who refuse to be participants. Once you step into the story, by word or gesture, you risk being written into its next verse. And yet, the hunt is not only fear, it is also a mirror for the year itself. It rides in the liminal seasons when things die back and are reborn, when communities reckon with loss and look ahead with uneasy hope. By imagining that the dead and the fae sweep through the sky in a great wild cavalcade, people gave shape to forces otherwise too large and impersonal to face. So when you hear the phrase wild hunt, think not just of a terrifying myth, but of a kind of moving border. On one side, hearthlight, human voices, small acts of courage like shutting a window or lying still in the mud. On the other, riders, hounds, gods, and fairy hosts, passing by in a brief, furious reminder that the world is larger and stranger than any cottage roof can fully keep out. The man who kept his face to the ground. There is an old saying in some northern villages that not all storms are made of weather. Some are made of riders, and the difference is whether you look up. One winter, a trader stayed too long in town. Snow had started to fall by the time he left the last inn, and the road home ran through a strip of dark forest where the trees crowded close and the wind funneled between them. He had heard tales of the hunt since childhood, but like most men half-tired and half-drunk, he counted them as something that happened to other people. At first, the storm seemed ordinary. The branches creaked, flakes stung his cheeks, and his breath smoked in front of him. Then the sound changed. The wind gathered itself into a single long howl, then broke apart into pieces. The sharp bark of unseen hounds, the blare of a horn, the echo of hooves where no road lay. The horses in the village stables, far behind him now, began to scream. His own body remembered the rules before his mind did. Without fully deciding to, he stepped off the path and dropped to his knees beside the frozen ruts. The snow was hard and bitter under his palms. "Face down," he heard his grandmother's voice say in memory. "Face down and do not look up, no matter what you hear. Let them pass like thunder." So he lay flat, cheek pressed to the cold earth, hat blown away, fingers digging into the frosted mud. The noise grew louder, not like something approaching along the road, but like something pouring overhead along an invisible highway in the air. Hoofbeats crashed so close above him that his ribs rattled. He felt the shock of impact in the ground as if invisible hooves were striking the very air he lay in. Somewhere just beyond his field of vision, dogs bayed in voices too deep and metallic to be natural. The temptation to look was a physical pain. Every instinct he had screamed to raise his head, to see what impossible shapes cast those flickering shadows across the snow beside him. He dug his fingers deeper into the ruts and clenched his teeth. For a moment, the air changed. The noise pulled back into a single point, like a whirlpool of sound. He smelled iron, cold leather, and something older, wet leaves and grave earth and a faint hint of smoke. A presence leaned close to him, though he could not say how he knew it. It felt tall, mounted, the weight of its gaze pressing down on the back of his neck. In the roar of the storm, a single thought seemed to brush the surface of his mind, as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. Are you with us or beneath us? Every story he had ever heard said that answering was a mistake, so he did the only thing left to him. He stayed absolutely still and said nothing at all. After a long, taut heartbeat, the pressure lifted. The noise burst outward again, the line of riders surging forward. Wind ripped at his cloak, flinging snow in sheets across his back, then began to dwindle, hooves and horns receding into the dark. When silence finally crept back, it felt thin and fragile. He lay there a while longer, waiting for his heart to remember how to beat at a human pace. Only when he could no longer feel any weight in the sky did he push himself up onto shaking arms. The road around him was scored with tracks, too many to count, pressed deep into the frozen mud and already half-blurred by drifting flakes. Dog prints the size of platters, horses' hooves that did not quite look like any shoe he had ever seen. If it had been some strange trick of the wind, it was a trick that left marks. He found his hat caught in a bush and walked home with it in his hands instead of on his head. When he reached his door, his wife said he looked as if he had been outside for a week rather than an hour. 4 days afterwards, sudden gusts of wind made him flinch. In the years that followed, he told the story rarely. When pressed, he would say only, "There are nights when the sky is busy. On those nights, it is better to be part of the ground than part of the noise." The old people nodded when they heard this. They knew the tales of the trader who had looked up and gone mad, of the drunkard who had shouted a challenge and been dragged along the clouds until his hair turned grey. Against those endings, a little mud on the face and a sore neck seemed a small price to pay. So if the wind ever rises at your window with voices braided into it, dogs, horns, hooves woven through the storm, think of the man in the ditch. Think of the choice between looking and living, between joining the hunt and letting it pass overhead like thunder. Then bank your fire, lie low, and keep your face to the ground until the sky is quiet again. The rider who chose the sky. There is a quieter kind of wild hunt story, told less often than the warnings about lying flat in the road. It begins not with someone trying to escape the riders, but with someone being invited to join them. Once, there was a woodsman who lived alone at the edge of a deep, northern forest. He was not a cruel man, but the years had worn him thin. Too many bad harvests, too many debts, too many evenings spent staring at a cold hearth. On winter nights he heard the hunt in the distance and thought, half in jest, that riding with them could not be much worse than trudging under them. One such night, when the snow lay heavy and the moon was a pale smear behind clouds, the sound came closer than ever before. Hounds bayed above the trees, and hoofs crashed in the air like drums. The little house shook in its foundations, dust and frost sifting down from the rafters. Instead of hiding, the woodsman stepped outside. The wind grabbed his cloak at once, trying to tear it from his shoulders, and icy air knifed into his lungs. He stood in the middle of the path, as the old tales sometimes advised, and looked up. The sky was full of motion. Shapes wheeled and dived, riders with cloaks streaming straight behind them, hounds racing along invisible roads in the dark, sparks flying from hooves that never touched the ground. At their center rode a figure taller than the rest, hood thrown back, eyes catching what little light there was like chips of frozen iron. The host swept closer, and for a moment it seemed they would simply pass over him, as they always had over others. Then the leader reined in a mount made of storm cloud and shadow, slowing the entire hunt as easily as a man might draw breath. The wind around the woodsman dropped into a heavy stillness. "You are standing in my road," the leader said. The voice was not loud, but it threaded through the bones more than the ears. "You should be on the ground, little one, if you wish to see the spring." The woodsman swallowed. "In the stories," he managed, "you spare those who stand in the middle of the path, not those who crawl in the ditch." A ripple went through the host, like distant laughter or the rustling of many wings. The hounds paced and circled in the air, breath pluming like smoke. The leader tilted his head, considering. "Bold," he said at last. "Bold, or tired of walking? Which is it, man of the trees?" The woodsman thought of his empty larder, his aching back, the long, slow march of winters behind him. "Both," he said. "Bold enough to stand. Tired enough to wish I didn't have to." The leader leaned forward in the saddle, and for a heartbeat the woodsman saw more clearly. Scars, a missing eye, something ancient and restless burning behind the remaining one. "I have room," the rider said softly, "for one more who does not fear the wind." The offer hung in the frozen air. "Ride with us," the voice went on. "Leave the cold floor of your house, the slow hunger and the small griefs. Trade them for the sky, for speed, for the knowledge of every road between this world and the next." The woodsman imagined it. No more trudging through snow with an axe on his shoulder, no more counting coins by candlelight, no more wondering which illness or accident would finally carry him off. Instead, hooves under him, hounds at his side, storms answering to his call. To look down on the roofs of men instead of up at them. "What would it cost?" he asked. The leader's smile was brief and thin. "Only what you are not using," he said. "Your place at the table. Your name in the mouths of neighbors. The warmth of a single pair of hands on a bitter night. We ride hard, and we do not come home." The woodsman thought of the few things he owned. A chipped mug, a worn blanket, a chair that creaked when he sat. They did not seem like much beside the rolling thunder of the hunt. But then another image came to him, unbidden. The way the children in the village waved when he brought them kindling, the way the innkeeper's wife always put aside a crust for him without comment. If he took the bargain, his house would grow cold and collapse, his path would fill with weeds, and in time no one would remember his face. He would be a shape in stories, a rider pointed at in fear, a name spoken only in whispers when the wind howled too long at the door. He looked up at the leader of the hunt, at the ranks of restless riders behind him, and saw in their faces a hunger that had nothing to do with food. There was freedom there, yes, and power, and endless road. But there was also a sameness that would never end. "I have chopped enough wood," he said slowly, "to know that even the strongest tree falls in time. I think I would rather hear my own roof crack than someone else's sky forever." For a moment, nothing moved. Then the leader threw back his head and laughed, a sound that shook snow from the branches. "Very well," he said. "You have chosen the ground over the storm. Keep it, then. But know this, when your time comes, we may yet carry you for a little while on our road. No one walks forever." With that, he wheeled his mount. The host rushed forward again in a roar of hooves and howls, streaming past above the woodsman and vanishing into the clouds. The wind closed behind them like a door. The woodsman stood alone, knees weak, hands shaking. He went back inside, shut his door, and sat by his small hearth for a very long time, listening to the quiet creak of the house and the ordinary crackle of the fire. In the years that followed, he told almost no one what had happened. When pressed, he might say, "There are offers that sound like mercy when you are cold. It is worth asking what you will be carrying, and what you will be leaving behind." And on some winter nights, when the wind rose and the old familiar sounds threaded through it, he smiled into the dark, not in defiance, but in recognition. He had stood on the path and been asked to choose between sky and soil, between being part of the hunt and part of the village. For all its small sorrows, he had chosen the ground. The soul at the crossroads. There is a belief in some Welsh valleys that not every soul taken by the hunt is taken in anger. Sometimes, the riders come for those who have lost their way so completely that no human road can bring them home. In one such valley, an old path climbed from the village up toward the high moor, splitting at a bare crossroads where no trees would grow. People said that in older days there had been a gallows there, and that the ground remembered. Even after the wood had long rotted away, no one liked to linger where the tracks met. A shepherd from the village, a man worn down by years of small losses, began to walk there at night. His wife was gone, his only child buried on a hill behind the chapel, and the flock that remained to him was thin and sickly. He took to wandering after dark, as if the walls of his cottage had grown too tight. On one such night, when clouds smothered the stars and the air tasted of coming frost, he reached the crossroads and did not turn back. He stood there a long time, staring down each of the four ways, feeling none of them pull at him with any warmth. The world seemed to have narrowed to hard earth and old grief. Far off, a sound started, too distant to name at first, just a low, rolling murmur under the wind. It grew, not like a storm, but like many paws and hooves beating a path only they could see. The shepherd's dog whined and pressed against his leg, then bolted back down toward the village, leaving him alone. Out of the dark above the moor came a glow, not the flat light of lightning, but the shifting shimmer of many moving forms. White shapes broke from the cloud, racing along the line of the ridge. Dogs, huge and ghost-pale, with ears the color of fresh blood. Their voices rolled over the land in long, drawn-out bays that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Behind them rode a figure on a dark horse, cloak streaming, face half hidden in the hood. His presence carried the same chill as the graveyard at dawn and the same strange peace. This was Gwyn ap Neath, some said later, the hunter-king of Annwn, lord of the fair folk and guide of souls. The pack slowed as it reached the crossroads, circling the shepherd without quite touching ground. Their paws flickered inches above the dirt, leaving no mark, eyes bright as coals in a deep fire. Their growls rose and fell, loudest when they seemed far away, softest when they drew near, as the old people always said. The rider reined in his horse before the man. For a moment, neither spoke. The shepherd felt as though every sorrow he had ever carried was laid out in the open, visible like tracks in snow. "You have come to a meeting of roads," the rider said at last. His voice was quiet, but it left no space for the wind. "Not all of them lead back to your cottage." The shepherd swallowed. "I have walked all the ones that do," he answered, surprised to hear his voice at all. "They are worn thin, and so am I." One of the Annwn padded closer, lowering its great head until its red ears almost brushed the man's hands. Up close, its eyes were not cruel, only ancient and terribly alert, as if it could see straight through skin into whatever lay beneath. "You are not called by the rope," the rider said, "not called by plague, nor by sword. You stand here because grief has hollowed you out until the wind can blow through. That is not the same as being ready." The shepherd almost laughed, a dry, broken sound. "I do not feel ready," he said. "I only feel finished." The rider was silent for a time. Behind him, the hounds waited, their breath smoking in the cold air, their bodies tense with the urge to run. "There are souls we hunt," the rider said finally, "and souls we only guide. Tonight I am not hunting you." He lifted one hand, and at the gesture the crossroads seemed to deepen, as if the earth itself held a breath. "You have one road left," he went on. "Walk down into your village. Knock on a door that is not your own. Tell the truth when they ask why your eyes look like winter. If no hand reaches back for yours, If no voice answers, then when next we pass, we will speak again." The shepherd stared at him, astonished. He had expected judgment, or at least indifference. Not terms, not conditions that sounded uncomfortably like hope. "What if I cannot make myself knock?" he asked softly. The rider's mouth curved, not quite in a smile. "Then perhaps you are not finished after all. The choice is yours. We give you the night." With that, he lowered his hand. The hounds threw their heads back and bayed, a sound like many doors opening at once. In a rush of pale bodies and pounding not-quite hooves, the hunt swept past and up into the clouds, leaving the crossroads empty again. The shepherd stood there while the echoes faded, feeling the ache in his chest where something heavy had shifted. Then he turned, not toward the moor, not toward the wild dark where no one would follow, but down the hill. It was a long walk to the village, and his feet grew numb with cold. When he reached the first cottage, he stood at the door so long that frost began to creep along the edges of the window-glass. At last, with a hand that shook worse than it had in any winter storm, he knocked. Light spilled when the door opened, warmth, and the startled face of a neighbor who had thought him asleep. When she saw his expression, she stepped aside without asking, saying only, "Come in, then. The night is too hard to stand in it alone." He crossed the threshold. Behind him, the crossroads on the hill faded into ordinary darkness, the marks of spectral paws leaving no trace anyone could see. In later years, when he spoke of that night at all, he said only this: "Not every hunt comes to take you. Sometimes they come to see whether you will still choose a human door when the sky offers you an easier way out." And on winter evenings, when the dogs in the village pricked their ears at sounds their owners could not hear, he would quietly add another log to the fire and listen, not with dread this time, but with something like gratitude. The road that skipped a beat. In the oldest stories, the wild hunt rides over forests and fields, far from streetlights and asphalt. But roads remember things, and sometimes even a modern highway feels a little too close to the old paths. There is a story told about a driver heading home along a remote stretch of country road late one autumn night. The rain had just stopped, leaving the tarmac slick and dark, reflecting back every bit of her headlights as if she were driving over a drowned sky. Her phone battery was dead, and the last village lay miles behind her. At first, the only sounds were the steady hum of the engine and the soft hiss of tires on wet pavement. Then another sound threaded itself in underneath, so quietly she almost missed it, a faint, rhythmic drumming that did not match the rotation of her wheels. It came and went, as if someone were tapping lightly at the underside of the world. She slowed, thinking it might be a mechanical problem, but the car felt steady under her hands. The drumming grew clearer, resolving into something like many hooves striking a hard surface very far away. The air in the car went thin and cold. Mist began to pool along the verges, rising in low banks that curled around the guardrails. Her headlights cut tunnels through it, but beyond those narrow cones of vision there was only shifting grey. The sat-nav on the dead phone flicked on for a heartbeat, showed no signal, then died again. She told herself it was just weather, just exhaustion. Then, up ahead, the road seemed to double. For a few long seconds she saw an older track running alongside the modern one, a pale, rutted strip of ghostly dirt and stone, lined with half-imagined hedges and twisted trees. On that older road, something was moving. Riders, dozens of them, flowed along the phantom track at a dead run, their horses' hooves passing through fence posts and mile markers without leaving a mark. Dogs raced ahead, shapes made of fog and starlight, mouths open in silent bays she somehow heard in her bones. Her car glided on, engine now weirdly muffled, as if swaddled in wool. She watched, unable to blink, as a gap opened in the phantom host, just wide enough for her vehicle to pass through. On either side, horses' legs and hounds' bodies blurred like reflections in fast water. At the center of that shifting storm of forms, a single rider turned his head. His face was indistinct, features smudged by speed and mist, but his attention was unmistakable. For a breath, it felt as though all of that roaring silence narrowed to a point and pressed against the glass of her windshield. The steering wheel jerked in her hands as if something had nudged it. Instinct screamed at her to look away, to stare fixedly at the painted lines of the real road and not meet whatever gaze was trying to lock with hers. With an effort that made her shoulders ache, she dragged her eyes back to the reflective stripes and held them there. The car skimmed through the ghost road gap in a kind of suspended moment. Hooves flashed inches from her windows. A hound's pale form seemed to pass right through her bonnet, leaving behind a smell like wet stone and cold metal. For an instant, the dashboard lights went out. Then, as if someone had let go of a breath, everything snapped back. The old track vanished. The mist thinned. Sound rushed in. Engine, tires, the rattle of something in the glove compartment. She found herself further along the road than she should have been. A sign she knew marked the halfway point had already slipped past, though she had no memory of passing it. Her watch insisted only a minute or two had gone by. The fuel gauge suggested considerably more. At home, in the flat, the ordinary noises of a building full of sleeping people felt almost unreal. She sat on the edge of her bed with her car keys still in her hand, trying to decide whether what she had seen was a hallucination born of long hours and bad weather. In the end, she told almost no one. Once, with too much coffee and too little sleep between them, she mentioned it to an older co-worker from the same region. He listened without interrupting, then shrugged in that careful way people use when they are weighing up how much they want to admit. "There are roads," he said, "that run along older roads you can't see. Sometimes, on the wrong kind of night, you get both together for a bit. If you're lucky, you stay on the one with white lines." She asked, "What happens if you don't?" He stared at his mug for a long moment. "Then maybe," he answered, "you learn how fast a horse can go without touching the ground. Or you don't come back to tell anyone, and the rest of us just say there was black ice." After that, she kept her tank full and avoided that stretch of road in bad weather. On the rare nights when she had no choice, she turned the radio off as she drove and listened for anything riding under the sound of the tires. If the air grew too still or the mist too thick, she eased her speed and fixed her gaze on the living stripes beneath her wheels. Because in the end, the rules are not so different, whether you travel by boot leather or by car. When the wild hunt rides its older paths alongside ours, the safest thing is still to look down, keep your line, and refuse the invitation of any other road that suddenly appears beside you.